So, welcome to Wine and Wisdom for tonight. Parshat Toldot. We are quickly moving along. Abraham, now Yitzchak, right? Sarah passed away last week. The beginning of last week's Parsha. Last week, Yitzchak found a wife, and now we already start moving into Yaakov territory. The beginning of the Parsha is Eila Toldot Yitzchak. Abraham told Yitzchak. These are the children of Yitzchak, the son of Abraham. And it goes on to say how Rivka finally becomes pregnant, right? For years, they'd like to know. They're praying for a child, and Yitzchak and Rivka become pregnant. In other words, Rivka becomes pregnant. And the children are, of course, quarreling inside, as we'll learn all about it in the Parsha overview, which Phil will fill us in. Did you guys see what I did there?
Yes, very nice.
Okay.
Smooth.
Phil will fill us in.
Phil will fill us in.
In just a moment. But the title of tonight's class is, "This Holy Land is Your Land, the Uniqueness of Israel and Our Special Right to It." And although, of course, we're going to talk about the Parsha, tonight we're going to talk a lot about the land of Israel. And I recognize here almost everyone that were students of mine in the summer. And we did the course Survival of a Nation. So this may be very, very familiar, but you'll see it will be a powerful lesson that we'll take away from this week's Parsha. But the parts that are similar to what we studied in the summer, I will try to move through a little quicker. I think all of you were with us at that time. Okay, so in the student book, we are on page 67. We will ask Phil to fill us in. What is Parshat Toldot all about?
May I give you a little good news? I just got on
Please, yes, please, sure.
Abraham's mother has been very, very sick.
Right. He mentioned that to me.
He just
We've
called.
been praying.
She has recovered.
Baruch Hashem. Amazing. Thank God. Okay.
Okay.
On that note, tonight's class is available to be sponsored. If anybody wants to, please let me know. Phil, get us started. Parshat Toldot. What's it all about?
Yitzchak and Rebekah endure 20 childless years until their prayers are answered and Rebekah conceives. She experiences a difficult pregnancy as the children struggle inside her. God tells her that there are two nations in your womb and that the younger will prevail over the elder. Esau emerges first. Jacob is born clutching Esau's heel. Esau grows up to be a cunning hunter, a man of the field. Jacob is a wholesome man, a dweller in the tents of learning. Isaac favors Esau. Rebekah loves Jacob. Returning exhausted and hungry from the hunt one day, Esau sells his birthright, i.e. his rights as a firstborn, to Jacob for a pot of red lentil stew. In Gerar, in the land of the Philistines, Yitzchak presents Rebekah as his sister out of fear that he was be killed by someone coveting her beauty. He farms the land, reopens the wells dug by his father, Abraham, and digs a series of his own wells. Over the first two, there is strife with the Philistines, but the waters of the third well are enjoyed in tranquility. Esau marries two Hittite women. Isaac grows old and blind and expresses his desire to bless Esau before he dies. While Esau goes off to hunt for his father's favorite food, Rebekah dresses Jacob in Esau's clothes, covers his arm and neck with goatskins to simulate the feel of his hairier brother, prepares a similar dish, and sends Jacob to his father. Jacob receives his father's blessing for the dew of the heaven and the fat of the land, and mastery over his brother. When Esau returns and the deception is revealed, all Isaac can do for his weeping son is predict that he will live by his sword, and then when Jacob falters, the younger brother will forfeit his supremacy over the elder. Jacob leaves home for Sharon to flee Esau's wrath and to find a wife in the family of his mother's brother, Laban. Esau marries the third wife, Mahalat, the daughter of Ishmael.
Okay, and that is Parshat Toldot in a nutshell. We are going to focus on one verse in particular in Parshat Toldot, but before we do so, we have a rather long introduction, okay? Which means we often have introductions to our class, but this week, please bear with me as it's going to be a little bit longer. In today's class, as the title suggested, This Holy Land is Your Land, the Uniqueness of Israel and Our Special Right to It, is going to be a lot about the land of Israel and the Jewish claims to the land of Israel. Now, Israel bashing has become a favorite pastime in today's day and age, but really ever since the founding of the state of Israel. And inevitably, the claim is always identical. The land doesn't belong to you. The land belongs to whoever it is. It doesn't belong to the Jewish people. And when we have to answer for what reason the land does belong to us, what is our claim to the land of Israel, we find ourselves inevitably turning back, at least if we look to the Declaration of Independence at the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, we find ourselves inevitably going back to the same three claims. Can anybody help me? Give me, why does the land of Israel belong to the Jewish people? Anybody want to?
God gave the land to the
Abraham.
people.
We'll get to that one. Besides for that, very often people feel uncomfortable.
To the establishment of the current
Yes.
modern state.
Mhm.
The United Nations declared.
This is what is known as the international legal
Right.
right to the land of Israel, right? Based on the Balfour Declaration, which later became the British Mandate. And then when the British Mandate split in two and the Arabs declined, the two states, right, the Arab state and the Jewish state, and started a war, the Jewish people on that same day declared independence, right? Hence the founding of the State of Israel. This was later in the 1940s, late 1940s, Aldi, please join us, was later accepted by the United Nations, right? So we have claim number one to the land of Israel, which is international legal argument, right? Give me another one. Another right that the Jewish people have to the land of Israel.
Right of conquest.
Right of conquest. I would call that more a historical right. When you say right of conquest, you mean in 1948? They didn't conquer it in 1948. I know there was a war.
Survived.
They survived the war, right? But it was more of it was given to them by the British. It was more of a legal perspective.
Okay.
But historically, if you go back 3,000 years, right? The Jewish people conquered the land of Israel from the Philistines. Those Philistines are no longer around.
The UN
Not the
did a
Philistines.
part.
The Canaanites, the Philistines, what?
The UN and the British did a partition.
That goes under the international legal perspective.
That was the first one.
So that's one claim. So we're
Okay.
looking for three of them, right? International legal claim is number one. From a legal law perspective, international law perspective, land of Israel belongs to us, based on the Balfour Declaration, based on the UN resolution, which was passed, by the way, by like overwhelming majority in the I think it was 1951 or 1949. I don't remember.
Jews have a continuous history in the land.
So exactly. So that's what he was mentioning. But conquest, since when the Jewish people, just let it comment in. Since when the Jewish people lived in the land of Israel 3,000 years ago, when they arrived, they conquered the entire land of Israel from the Canaanites and the Philistines, etc., those that were there. So we have a historical right to the land of Israel, right? Just as much as the native Indians have to America, certainly, right? I mean, we're there for thousands of years. Anybody who was there before us is no longer around.
We're basically the indigenous people.
We're basically the indigenous people. Okay, that is claim number two. Claim number three. Anybody another claim? This was a very big one. If you look for when this is very relevant. If you look for when the State of Israel was founded, the State of Israel gets founded in 1948, following which major Jewish event?
The 6-Day War.
No, that's 1967.
Okay.
The Holocaust.
Very good. The Holocaust. Another reason given for why the State of Israel, for why the land of Israel belongs to Jewish people, very often is Jewish survival. Jews have tried for too long to be a people without a state, the people without a land, the people without a country, and whenever we've tried it, it's failed. Right? So we wander around, we go to Spain, and we're there for a couple hundred years, and it's successful, and then they say, oh, we don't want you here, go back to where you came from. Where we came from. What do you mean? We came from Israel, right? But okay, the Jews end up in Egypt, end up in whatever it is, right? The different
Wandering Jew.
in Morocco, etc. The wandering Jew. In other words, that in order for Jews to survive, this is the Jewish survival argument. In order for Jews to survive, it's necessary for us to have a land where we can control our fate, where we can be in charge of what's going to happen. We can have our own army, we can defend ourselves, just like any other nation. These are the three reasons that are mentioned, at least in the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel, 1948. These are the three reasons given for why the Jewish people, the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. Okay? Now, if we go through them one at a time, however, welcome, Kalman. It's good to have you with us.
Oh,
Good to be here. Sorry I'm late.
Just for context, Kalman, we can all hear you, and then you can hear all of us. So that should be the, okay?
can he us also?
Just making sure. Yeah, he can see us.
I'm alone. There's no noise. It's fine.
All right, no, I'm just making sure that you know where you stand. That's it. Like the last thing I would want is for somebody to think that they're just in my to make sure you know where you stand. There's this little device here that we purchased, which seems to have helped us out a lot. It's like a conference room
Microphone.
speaker, microphone and speaker.
Yeah.
And it's connected by Bluetooth to my phone, and this seems to have been the best solution so far. So let us know if the audio is all right.
It's nice that people are once again, in the library.
Indeed. Tell me about it. Yes, indeed. Okay, so we have three arguments for why the land of Israel might belong to the Jewish people, right? Number one, international law, legal perspective. Number two, Jewish survival, right? It's the only place where the Jewish people can survive together. And number three, history. We're there for 3,000 years. We conquered it from a people that's no longer around. We're the only ones still around. It belongs to us. We are the indigenous people. Each one of these, however, if you take a look at them, has real gaping loopholes or gaping holes, I should say, that when you try to just use that argument, at least, it doesn't really hold water.
Yeah, but what does any other country have?
Okay, no problem. I'm just saying, if we're looking for a hardcore association with the land of Israel,
Why should we need a hardcore, but the United States doesn't?
fair enough. You ask a very good question. But if we're looking for one,
Okay.
from an international legal perspective, the automatic loop, the automatic gaping hole is anybody?
Well, I assume it's that the UN didn't have the right to give the land.
Very good. And we can add to that today the UN regrets that decision. In other words, if it's international law that gave it to us, then international law should be able to take it away.
Is that official, or you're just saying?
Is it official what that
the
well, they
UN
certainly-
has changed their?
I don't know that they would take the entire
The membership today.
certainly the membership today would not, maybe they wouldn't take the entire thing away, but they would certainly want us backing away from certain parts of it that we
Yeah, which is vital
Now,
to our.
if everything is correct, which is vital to our survival. So now, if international law is our entire basis, then, right? By the way, another thing, just on an idealistic level, on an ideological level, someone can say, Balfour Declaration, Schmalfer Declaration doesn't make a difference. If it was colonial activity, immoral colonial activity, and they were just taking over, then we don't care what happened in the past. Even if they did say it was legal then, it's not really legal. It's not really moral, right? So
Well, it's legal as anything because Turkey, Turkey conquered that land. So the people that claim that it's their land, it was never really their land.
you keep coming back, I think, to the Palestinians.
Yeah, I do.
Right, but let's leave them out of the picture for now. Let's just talk, even without Palestinians. We're just talking to the whole world about why the land doesn't belong to us. If you're only relying on an international law argument, it's a little flawed because, first of all, international law seems to have changed. There seems to be a consensus that says maybe certain parts of the land don't belong to us. Number one, and number two is that we can easily say, yeah, international law, whatever, for whatever it's worth, but it was immoral, right? Number two, the Jewish survival argument, right? This is the easiest one to thwart. It's very nice that the Jewish people had a hard time. I mean, not very nice. It's very sad that the Jewish people had a hard time. We very much sympathize. This is me talking on behalf of the world, right? We very much sympathize with the Jewish people. But first of all, why do you have to take the most contested land in the world, right? Remember that Herzl was thinking of going to Uganda or to Kenya, etc., right?
Yeah.
So if you're looking from a Jewish survival perspective, it doesn't have to be Israel. Okay, go somewhere else and survive. Number one. Number two, probably the strongest one of all. Again, speaking on an ideological perspective, on an ideological level, actually, if any of us want to keep our investments, what do? You diversify. You diversify your investment, right? You don't put everything into one stock and then say, let me just rely on Bernie Madoff being a trustworthy guy, right? You diversify. You spread it into different companies, right? Excuse me. So actually, from a Jewish survival perspective, it might be a better idea. In fact, maybe we can even claim that the reason why the Jewish people survived till today is because they were all spread all around the world.
Yeah.
So Germany comes and wipes out all the Jews on the face of Germany, even if they would have been successful, right? Even on the face of Europe, there's still Jews in America. There's still Jews in Australia, right? But now you establish a state, you bring all the Jewish people to one land. From a Jewish survival perspective, it might not necessarily be the best idea.
Well,
So far,
Iran's
2
happy
down,
about it.
one to go. Coming on?
Iran would be happy if
Iran, exactly. So by the way, there's two historical times that you can look at. The 6-Day War. I mean, you look at the months leading up to the 6-Day War, people were like, this is going to be the next Holocaust, and we brought it on ourselves because we all went to one place, right? Similarly, now with Iran, people are worried about that. Right? Heaven forbid. Obviously, it's the safest place in the world. But that's from a miraculous perspective. Looking at it from a simple perspective, it might not be that Jewish survival makes it, And then the last one is historical arguments, right? The historical argument is all very nice, but we can still say, if we're making to look our cases. In Solomon. But then we left. And it's true that there never ceased to be Jews living in the land of Israel, but at times it was a very small population, certainly not the ruling class. So then to come back today and say you want to take it back, right? That's like that. So that if you took it back from other people, then other people will take it back from you. You know what I mean? Like,
You're really playing the devil's advocate.
the point we're trying to make
That's
is
ideal.
the point we're trying to make here is that there are three arguments that are made in the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel. They are, first of all, they are primarily made for the state of Israel, but they're also made even for the land of Israel from a very human perspective. And they try to deal with like natural ways for why the land of Israel belongs to us. But if we're really looking to make our argument as strong as possible, first of all, we should recognize that all three of them together. And number two, we should recognize that the real claim that we have to the land of Israel is actually godly, is actually biblical. Is the fact, like everybody mentioned the first time I asked why land of Israel belongs to us, the reason that the land of Israel belongs to us has nothing to do with Jewish survival. It has nothing to do with international law. It has nothing to do with history and historical claim to the land. Although these are all fine and nice, proofs. But there's only one reason for real why the land of Israel belongs to us, and that's because God gave it to us.
That's a problem, though,
Why is that a problem?
because we're the only ones that really acknowledge that. Or maybe the Christians do.
I'm not entirely sure if that's true. I actually think that all three religions that there are in the world, if somebody's being honest, and because they all believe in the Torah, if they're being honest with themselves, they look through the Torah, they see the land is always given to the Jewish people.
That's why I said the Christians.
Christians and the Muslims.
Muslims
They also believe in the
recognize
Torah.
it.
They also believe in the Torah.
They may not.
They may not enjoy doing that. But and by the way, just like the Christians, they may have other addendums to it. Oh, it was for the land of it was for the Jewish people, but then the Jewish people messed up, so now there's a new chosen people. Right? You're familiar with this rhetoric.
Yeah.
But if you look in the Torah, the land of Israel is clearly given to the Jewish people.
Mhm.
And one of the verses that clearly shows this is in this week's Parshat. See, we were eventually going to get there. Okay, Marilyn, if you can read.
You had this all planned out,
Yes.
didn't you?
If you can read us these texts 1a, this is when Yitzchak is faced with a similar comment. Do you have the text in front of you?
No.
I sent you a link. Did you see that?
Oh, was that the Google? Okay,
The Google Drive link is to the text if you'd like it.
okay.
So text 1a is when Yitzchak is faced with a similar predicament to his father Abraham. In other words, there's a hunger in the land. He needs to leave. He's got to go somewhere else, etc. And he says, "All right, no problem. Let me go down to Egypt." And Hashem says, "Not so fast. You are too holy. You don't leave the land of Israel." Let's see what happens now.
And God appeared to him, Isaac, and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land that I will tell you. Sojourn this land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and to your seed will I give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father."
Okay.
In other words, he's keeping the oath that he made to Abraham. He's saying to him that the shul that I made to your father is going to be continued.
It's going to continue in you.
Right.
And as a result, I don't want you to leave this land. Okay? It says, Guru ba'aretz hazos. Live in this land. Okay. Don't go down to Egypt. Rashi explains what's going on. Why not go down to Egypt? Marilyn, keep going.
Okay. Do not go down to Egypt. Isaac had in mind to go down to Egypt as his father had gone down in the days of the famine. God said to him, "Do not go down to Egypt. You are as a perfect burnt offering, and being outside the Holy Land is not fitting for you."
Okay.
You're as perfect as a burnt offering. You are as
let me,
perfect burnt.
right, as I bring this up. Exactly. So this is the point. Remember, at the end of Parshat Vayera, we learn about how Yitzchak is almost sacrificed on the altar, right? The famous Akedat Yitzchak, right? Now here's the deal. Rashi says that from that moment onward, Yitzchak was as holy as a burnt offering. He was like as holy as a sacrifice. He was only for God. And that's why a holy person has to stay in a holy land. Alan, we can't see you. We would love to see you. And you're muted. Okay, hopefully you'll join us soon. So This is really where I'm trying to get to today. Why? Because this is an interesting statement. Holy person can't leave a holy land. Now, we know that the land was already promised to Abraham, as Eli mentioned a couple of parshas ago, at the covenant between the pieces, right, which we're going to read about in just a moment. However, all of this business is taking place hundreds of years before, if not over about 400 years before the Jewish people will even enter the land of Israel. So evidently, even before the Jews conquered the land of Israel, because it was already promised to them, there was something holy about it. There was something special about it that Yitzchak couldn't leave it. Okay, let's go back to see the different verses that talk about the uniqueness of the land of Israel. Let's go back to God's promise to Abraham. Catherine, can you read for us, please? Text 2a.
On that day, God formed a covenant with Abraham, saying, "To your seed I have given this land, from the river of Egypt until the great river."
Okay.
Euphrates.
Yeah, until the great river, the Euphrates River. The key here is that we are hundreds of years before the Jewish people are conquering the land of Israel. And yet, look at the term that is used, right? It says, on that day, God formed a covenant with Abraham. He says, to your seed, I have given this land. Crucial detail there, right? L'zarach natati is past tense. I have already given it. Hold on a second. I thought you were promising now that you're going to give it, and then there's going to be a time when they're going to conquer it, and you're going to be with them, and miraculously they'll conquer the entire land. If you take a look at this, it indeed was miraculous, right? So what do you mean past tense? You have given it, right? So here the Medrash says something very interesting. Catherine, finish off for us, text 2b.
God's spoken word is considered like deed. As the verse states, "To your seed I have given this land." It does not state, "I will give this land," but "I have given this land."
So in other words, the moment that God promises the land of Israel to Abraham, it actually already becomes the land of Israel, Abraham's land of Israel. Now I know there are a lot of you thinking, this is all fine and dandy, but it's obviously some sort of, I don't know, honorary ownership title, like when people come to the mayor and they hand over the key. I mean, it's very nice that God has given past tense land of Israel to the Jewish people. The Jewish people are still going to spend 210 years in slavery in Egypt, right? Clearly, the land of Israel doesn't actually belong to them yet, right? But as it turns out, that even from a halachic perspective, which means even from a Jewish legal perspective, it does already belong to them. Which story can prove this to us? Text 3 is the story of the daughters of Tzlafcha. Okay, now the daughters of Tzlafcha is a story where 5 daughters come to Moshe Rabbeinu. They say, "Listen, we got a problem. Our father has died. He has no sons. We want, and Moshe Rabbeinu had never discussed inheritance by a daughter to a son. It was only father to son." So they say, "Listen, we also want our portion of the land, and we want a double portion for the Bechor, etc., for the firstborn, but without getting into all the legal details." Moshe Rabbeinu is not sure what to do, so he turns to God. What does God respond? Kalman, can you read for us, please? Text 3.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, the daughters of Tzlafcha, the son of Chefer, the son of Gilad, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, of the families of Manasseh, the son of Yosef, came forward, and his daughters' names were Machla, Noah, Chagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. Why should our father's name be eliminated from his family because he had no son? Give us a portion along with our father's brothers. So Moses brought their case before God. Then I have a picture.
Right, and that's where it ends. And then, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, "Okay, you know what? The daughters can also inherit." Right? Now, the Gemara, I know, right? Big victory for women's rights by Judaism, way before the feminist movement. Okay, great. Not the only thing that Jews have been fighting for women's rights for thousands of years before the rest of the world came on board. But the Talmud of Baba Basra actually says, you know what? I'm not even satisfied with it being, women's rights weren't established yet. And Moshe Rabbeinu had to go ask it. The Talmud says if that was the issue on the table, then Moshe Rabbeinu could have done it on his own. If anybody wants to go look it up, it's in Baba Basra on page 119a, and at the bottom of 119a goes over to 119b. Anyways, so the Gemara in Baba Basra says like this. This is fasting. Actually, the issue on the table wasn't the fact that there was no son to inherit. Moshe Rabbeinu himself could have figured out that daughters could also inherit. The issue on the table was that the person to whom the land was supposed to be allotted actually didn't own the land yet. At least so far as Moshe looked at it. Remember, this story is happening before Moshe passes away, which means that automatically it's before the Jewish people enter the land of Israel, right? Moshe Rabbeinu never makes it to the land of Israel. So Tzlavcha, the father of these 5 daughters, never owned a piece of land. So how can he even? So their problem wasn't so much the fact that it was a father to daughters; it was more the fact that it was a non-existent father to daughters. How can he inherit the land when they go to the land of Israel and then give them a portion? And they were worried that their entire family's not going to have anything.
But were these daughters in the land of Israel?
Later on, yes.
Oh, later on.
So why wouldn't they have
What
gotten their
land were
portion?
they talking about? Because the
They were
Jews
talking
weren't
about the
even
portions that
there.
they were going to get.
Oh.
And presumably a
yeah.
portion would have been given to the house of Levi, the house of Tzlavcha, but Tzlavcha wasn't around.
Right.
So what does Hashem answer Moshe Rabbeinu? And this is why it ties in so powerfully to what we're talking about here. Hashem says, I answered your question already in Parshat Toldot. I said, Lazarachan natati, past tense. I've already given him the land. Which means that Tzlavcha technically was an owner of a piece of land in the land of Israel at the time of the story of his 5 daughters. And therefore, when he passed away, he was able to give it over as an inheritance to them. That's how strong the ownership of the land of Israel was. You understand? Even though not a single Jew had ever stepped foot in the land of Israel.
Yeah.
So this is what's going on here. But the question still becomes, what type of ownership is this? I don't get it. What type of ownership is this? Right? So and it's not just a question of what type of ownership is this, like just from our heads. It actually isn't a full type of ownership yet. Because it's very nice we draw like a halachic legal perspective, but what's another way that we can know if the land in Israel already belongs to the Jewish people? There are, I don't know, I want to say about 100 mitzvahs that only apply in the land of Israel. Most of them agricultural, but many other ones. Certainly if you count those that are related to the Holy Temple, then for sure. But even if you only count those related to agriculture in the land of Israel, right? Teruma, Meiser, all the different presents that we give to the poor, whether it's the corner of the field or the pieces that you forget while you're collecting it, etc. As it turns out, none of those applied until the Jewish people come to the land of Israel. Hold up a second. Now what's going on? Ron, can you read for us, please? Text 4. This is from Maimonides about the special laws that apply only in the land of Israel.
Whenever Eretz Israel is mentioned, the intent is the lands conquered by the king of Israel or a prophet with the consent of the entire Jewish people. This is called a conquest of the community. If, however, an individual Jew, a family, or a tribe goes and conquers a place for themselves, even in the land given to Abraham, it is not considered as Eretz Israel in the sense that one is obligated to observe all the mitzvot there. All of the land.
Sorry, go ahead.
All of the lands that the Jews who ascended from Egypt took possession of were sanctified in the first consecration of the land. When by contrast, the descendants of the exiles ascended from Babylon and took possession of a portion of the land, they consecrated it a second time. This consecration is perpetual forever, for that time and for all time.
Okay, so here we have something very interesting. By the way, fun trivia fact, maybe Kalman can answer for us. Which city in Israel is different than all other cities because of this Rambam? Eilat, very good. Thank you, Arnold. Eilat, because Eilat is technically was not conquered by the kings in Israel. And in fact, by the way, in Eilat, they keep 2 days of Yom Tov. It's in the modern state of Israel, but it's not a biblical Israel, therefore they keep 2 days of Israel. Okay, without getting into those details. Now, but where we've arrived here is we have this interesting perspective. The land of Israel clearly seems to belong to the Jewish people to such a strong degree that there can even be halachic ramifications where people are inheriting the land of their children based on this ownership. So we can't say it's just some sort of flimsy, honorific ownership, correct? On the other hand, clearly the mitzvahs that apply only to land of Israel are not in place yet, because no king has come and conquered the land, as Maimonides says. Certainly not the second time, which made it permanent, but not even one. So what exactly happened when God promised the land to Avram, and then in this week's parsha, when he tells Yitzchak, you're not allowed to leave, what type of ownership was there and what type of ownership wasn't there? What's going on here? And this leads us to appreciating, and we're on page 74 here, that there are 2 elements of Eretz Yisrael. There are 2 elements to the land of Israel. On the one hand, when we talk about God giving us the land of Israel, we talk about conferring ownership. This has halachic, legal ramifications. Who does it belong to, etc. Right? Who can earn land there? Who can plow it? Who can? All these sorts of questions, right? On the other hand, we have a certain holiness and a sanctity that the land of Israel has, which we'll elaborate on in just a moment, which is a whole different thing that God gives to the Jews. And as we're going to uncover in this week's lesson, actually those two are not necessarily happening at the exact same time. Let's start with text 5. Arnold, I think we're holding Arnold. Go ahead.
Two things occurred when the land was given to the Jewish people.
A.
The monetary element, that is, Jewish ownership of the land of Israel, and B, the sanctity of the land. The first element, Jewish ownership of the land, was achieved by God giving the land of Israel to Abraham and Abraham Avinu, our patriarch Abraham. But the second element, the land of Israel's sanctity, especially the special mitzvot that apply there, first occurred when the Jewish people entered the land.
So it turns out that there's two different elements. And by the way, just for fun, let's go back to the Bris Bein Absarim, to the covenant between the parts. The first time that God promises the land to the Jewish people, he in fact does so in two parts. Remember, we read earlier about I have given past tense. And now let's take a look at text 6a. Eli.
And I will give you and your seed after you the land of your sojourns, the entire land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be to them for a God.
This is only a couple of verses after God says, I have given to you. So has he given it to us already, or will he give it to us in the future? As the Maral points out, Eli, keep going.
It is true that the verse states, and I will give you and your seed after you, meaning in the future. But that refers to the actual giving, which hadn't yet taken place and would only occur in the future.
So in the same sentence, the same covenant, Hashem says, I have given it to you, but there's also another part that I haven't given you that I will give to you in the future. Okay? So there's two elements. All right. Those two elements are the ownership. That applies right away, as we see with Salavchad, right? That those legal ramifications happen right away. And then there's the holiness. That only happens after the Jewish people enter the land. But why? Why does it need to happen in two stages? Why can't it all happen at the same time? Stephanie, text 7.
The question arises, considering the view of the Midrash and Hakalata, that God's word conferred ownership of the land to Abraham and his descendants after him. Why can't we say that they're conferred sanctity as well? In which case, the laws pertaining to the land would have gone into effect.
Why are we saying that it's happening in two steps? What's the reason for that? Why couldn't it all have happened at the same time? Why couldn't God have given the land to Abraham? Already they owned it from then on. I understand they weren't technically there. That's a technical issue. But they technically already own it. And it's already holy. Why does the holiness wait until later for the holiness to arrive? So in order to understand that, let me ask you all a question. Right? It's on page 77. What fundamental change did the Jewish people undergo between the time of the forefathers and the conquering of the land at the time of Joshua? What is the greatest Jewish event that happened between those two moments? What was that? Giving of the Torah. Right? There's a lot that happens. There's an exile in Egypt, slavery in Egypt. There's an exodus from Egypt. Of course, there's Joseph and his whole story. Right? There's Yaakov and the 12 tribes. There's the wandering in the desert. There's the manna falling from heaven. But probably the most monumental thing that happens is the giving of the Torah. And the giving of the Torah actually is not just a technical thing. You know, I think if you ask many Jews what exactly happened in Mount Sinai in the year 2248, many of them will say, whatever, that's when we became a nation. That's when he gave us all these laws. That's when the cheeseburgers went out the window. You know what I mean? Like, something like that. But as a matter of fact, there was actually something very, very mega happening on a world stage that was changing the way that the world was going to work from then on. And in fact, the Medrash points out that the whole world up until then was leading up to that moment. And since that moment, we've been trying to fulfill the mission we were given that moment to bring Mashiach. So it's also on a global historical level that plays a huge role. What exactly changed in the reality of the world at the giving of the Torah? Text 8a. Phil, please.
The difference between the mitzvot performed by the forefathers before the Torah was given and the mitzvot performed by the Jewish people after the Torah was given has been discussed many times. Inasmuch as the mitzvot before the Torah was given weren't obligatory or mandated by God, they were unable to transform the physical material of an object used for a mitzvah to confer upon it the holy status of a mitzvah object. The effect of the mitzvah was only on the person performing it. In other words, the formal command when the Torah was given created the notion of a holy object existing in the world. Something can become a channel for a mitzvah to be performed with and through it. When a person performs a mitzvah, holiness is stamped into the physical object, rendering it a holy object.
So many of us, thank you, Phil. So many of us are familiar with the concept that the Medrash tells us that our forefathers did all the mitzvahs before the giving of the Torah, right? So obviously cheeseburgers were already off the table, right? Obviously the laws that we were given were already there beforehand. If you take a look at us being a nation, that also happened beforehand. So what exactly changed on the world stage, or certainly in the Jewish world, from that moment?
We accepted it.
Not just we accepted it, what changed was the holiness that we imbue in it, which means like this. In the words of the Medrash, it could be it's the Talmud, I don't recall exactly, it could be it's the Talmud and Tractate Shabbat, where the Talmud goes through all the different things, that at the time when they give the Torah, X, Y, and Z happened. But certainly either in the Medrash or in the Talmud, one of the things that's discussed is that there was this gzeira, there was this decree. And before Matan Torah, before the giving of the Torah, gzeira, there was a decree, that those from above should not come down below, those from below should not go up above. In other words, the spiritual world and the physical world were like two different worlds, divorced one from the other. Now, there were people in this world who did spiritual things. They were entering the spiritual world, but they weren't bringing spirituality into this world. The biggest proof of this, as Phil just elaborated for us from the Rebbe, the biggest proof of this was a mitzvah. We are told that Yaakov put on tefillin. As a matter of fact, Yaakov didn't even do it with parchments written with the words of Shema on it. He certainly didn't take a selfie afterwards, like most people do these days when they put on tefillin with somebody, right? There was nothing reminiscent of our tefillin and Yaakov's tefillin. Remember, the Medrash says that he had sticks, and when he was putting the sticks down in a certain way, he was doing the same spiritual idea that we do with tefillin. Now, that actually is not so surprising to me. Since when is tefillin all about the physical object that we're using? It's more of a spiritual meditation energy that comes down from God into this world, whatever. There's a certain connections going on. It's not about the physical object, right? That's why Yaakov actually took those sticks afterwards. He was able to throw them out. There was no spirituality that was brought down into this world. He accomplished some sort of spiritual energy, whatever, right? But he didn't actually bring it down into the physical world. Ever since Matan Torah, one of the things that happened was that we can put on tefillin and bring, this is mind-boggling. We can bring the holiness, this spiritual energy, which is really in the spiritual realm, and we can cross the divide and bring it into tefillin or into our own bodies. And what happens then? Now we're not allowed to throw out the tefillin anymore, right? Now our bodies become a little bit holier in that moment. For instance, for the man in the room, you know that when you put on tefillin, you have to make sure that your body is clean, right? If you need the bathroom, you take your tefillin off in order to use the bathroom. You're not even supposed to pass gas in tefillin, right? You're supposed to make sure that your mind is focused, etc. I don't understand. What does all these physical things have to do with the spiritual energy? It's not so spiritual. Stop calling it all spiritual. It's the spiritual coming down and affecting the physical and elevating the physical world. Now that's not a very technical level with tefillin. That's why we can't throw them out, right? But think about the effect it's having on your body. Think about the effect it's having on the world. When a woman lights Shabbat candles, it's not just about her waving her hands or some sort of energy that has nothing to do with the candles. No. She's bringing holiness into her home. She's bringing Shabbat into her home. Right? When a woman goes to the mikveh, she's literally sanctifying her marriage. Whoa, that's huge. That's a huge difference. That's taking a world where that's taking two worlds, spiritual and physical, and literally marrying them. Now, from then on, every time we do a mitzvah, every time we study Torah, every time we do whatever it is to be accomplished in this world, we pray. Every time we do that, we are elevating the physical world, which is what we know. Certainly, everybody in this class is already familiar with this concept. That is the purpose of Torah and mitzvahs, to elevate the world and bring it to a state of Mashiach. Right? Bring it to the ultimate state, which is the state of Mashiach. So hold on a second. So if that's what changed from before the giving of the Torah to after the giving of the Torah, in other words, in one word, holiness or spirituality coming down into this world, then that's also what changed with the land of Israel. The same thing applies to the land of Israel. Marilyn, text 8b.
The same applies to the land of Israel. Though the Jewish people already owned the land of Israel before the Torah was given, because God had spoken to that effect, the sanctity couldn't yet be stamped into the physical land. However, after the Torah was given, even before the people conquered it, it became possible for the land to become holy as a result of God's command to conquer it. When the Jewish people took over the land by conquering it, the holiness of the land was established.
One thing changed at the beginning of the Torah with regards to the land of Israel. It went from being a promise from God to Abraham to being a mitzvah. A mitzvah is very, very different than a promise. A mitzvah means that from now on, this thing is connected with a commandment that God gave us that this is what we're supposed to do. Ooh, that's a special holiness. And that's a special holiness that we only got to do in the Torah. And that's why, now to go back to the beginning, the ultimate counterclaim to all of the counterclaims, in other words, you try to say that the land belongs to us because of history. You try to say the land belongs to us because of an international legal argument, the Jewish survival argument, whatever it is. Each one of us has a counterclaim. The ultimate counterclaim to those counterclaims is that none of that is the reason why the land belongs to us. The land of Israel belongs to us because it is holy and because God gave it to us. And that's why the Rebbe would often point out that the first Rashi in the Torah is the best counterclaim to why the land of Israel belongs to us. Catherine, text 9, the first Rashi in the Torah, page 80.
Rabbi Yitzhak said, shouldn't the Torah have started with the verse, this comes to you, which is the first commandment that the Israelites were commanded? Why then does it begin with in the beginning, that is, with the start of creation? The reason is reflected in the verse. The strength of his works, he related to his people to give them the inheritance of the nations. If a nation of this world should say to Israel, you are robbers, will you conquer by force the lands of the seven nations of Canaan? We will reply, the entire earth belongs to the Holy One. Blessed be He. He created it and gave it to whomever He deemed proper. When He wished, He gave it to the Canaanites. And when He wished, He took it away from them and gave it to us.
And this is the true claim to the land of Israel. Right? So let's unpack this real. So Rabbi Yitzchak is saying that the reason why the Torah starts with Bereshit, the reason why the Torah starts by telling us that God created the world is in order that we should know that the entire world and every single country in the world belongs to God. So if God chooses to give one country to one people, He has every right to do so. Right? And then look at the last line. So that if the non-Jews of the world will come and they will say, Listim atem, you are robbers, then we will have the ultimate claim against them. Let's unpack that for a second. Why is it that everybody has such a big deal with the fact that we live in the land of Israel? Why is it that they're coming to us and saying, you are thieves, you are robbers, you've stolen the land? How come they don't say that? I mean, I know they're saying it to the Americans now a little bit, but it's like such a small fraction. It's not really something that anybody's worried about, right? But I'm saying, like, why is that? Why is it that of all the countries in the world, the one country, there have been other countries since, there were definitely countries before that people conquered from other people, etc., right? And we have actually more reasons why is they have this big issue? Perhaps what lies at the core of it is that we're actually claiming a different type of ownership than everybody else is claiming their land. Americans claim, I'm not even sure who exactly Americans are, the people who currently live here, whatever. Americans claim we conquered the land. Ever since then, we are the children of the people who conquered it. I don't even know if that's true anymore. There's like such a small percentage of America. There's other people that have come, there's a big melting pot. The ownership is not even such a deep ownership. And then we come, we say the land of Israel is ours. It's ours, and it's ours before you even knew it was ours. It's ours before the world was created. And you know what? It's ours, and it belongs to a Jew wherever he is in the world. In other words, I don't know that it was possible. I don't know that anybody really went anywhere else. Right? But let's do a hypothetical here for a moment. Imagine if during the 40 years in the desert, right? The Jewish people, let's say during year 3940, okay? There's one Jew who, I don't know, something happens to him, he goes on a trip, on a boat ride, he gets caught in some sort of windstorm, whatever it is, he ends up in Australia, okay? One Jew. Fast forward a couple of years, Joshua takes the Jewish people into the land of Israel. Moses passes away, Joshua takes the Jewish people into the land of Israel, they then conquer the land of Israel. Our claim of ownership to the land of Israel is that when Joshua conquered the land of Israel, because he was just enacting something that God had really promised us and the holiness that the land of Israel had now since giving the Torah, this Jew in Australia who doesn't even know he's Jewish anymore, his descendants, also owns a part of the land of Israel. That's how deep the ownership and the connection to the land of Israel is that we're claiming that we have. Whoa. People are like, I can't handle that. What should why should you have them? And that's where the answer is. You know what the answer is? Because God gave it us. The only way anybody can truly have a connection to that, that's the type of connection you have to this land. The Rebbe elaborates in text 10a. I think we're all in common, right?
Mhm.
I think so. Common 10a, please.
The conquest of the land of Israel is different. From when the Jewish people took the lands of the 7 nations, the land itself changed. Before it, it had been a land like all other lands which could belong to any nation. But from the moment it was conquered by the Jewish people, it was transformed into the land of Israel, a Jewish land through and for all time, to the extent that it could no longer belong to any other nation. The Gentiles also know that once the Jewish people took the lands of the seven nations, it became Eretz Israel forever. And this is precisely why they claim you are robbers. Inasmuch as before the Jewish people conquered it, it was a land like all others that could belong to any nation. The Jewish people don't have the right to take the land of Israel in such a way that it will be taken from them forever. This they claim is robbers.
And this is why the nation don't have such an issue. And to this, there can be only one answer, and it's the answer that Ron will read for us. Please, Ron, text 10b. There can be only one answer to such a claim.
The answer to the claim is that the entire earth belongs to the Holy One, blessed be He. He created it. He has the right to transform the land's quality from one that can be called the lands of the nations to one that is exclusively the land of Israel.
So rambling about the Balfour Declaration, we're going on a trip through the annals of history to figure out if during the Spanish, when the Jews were in Spain, were there some Jews that were left in Jerusalem or not, right? Or talking about the 6-day war, or whatever it is, right? Or saying how important it is that we survive, etc. That has nothing to do with the connection that the Jewish people have to the land of Israel. And this, by the way, connected, what we're describing here is the Rebbe's perspective on why there's such a strong Jewish claim to the land of Israel. And this is why you will never find once that the Rebbe will use an interesting term which Jews around the world use, Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel. The Rebbe never used those words. The Rebbe always used the words, anybody? Eretz Yisrael, which means the land of Israel. Seems like such a subtle difference, right? But the Rebbe is underscoring or making sure to bring out with those words exactly what the Jewish claim to the land of Israel is. Now, in trying to figure out what year it was. I don't remember what year it was. I think it was the 1970s, 1980s. The president of the state of Israel was a man by the name of Zalman Shazar, President Zalman Shazar. And he had a very, very, very close relationship with the Rebbe. He came to visit the Rebbe. It's a gorgeous video. You guys should all look it up on YouTube afterwards. That President Zalman Shazar and the Rebbe. He comes walking up, like regally, like a politician, etc. The Rebbe comes walking towards him, and the Rebbe kisses him once and twice. It's a beautiful reception. Anyways, and then the Rebbe takes him to his office, and they talk about, this is already the culmination of letters and letters. They had a very, very close relationship. I mean, the Rebbe had a close relationship with many of the politicians of the state of Israel, right? And he, at one point, asked the Rebbe, he says, why is it that the Rebbe refuses to use the term state of Israel? And in a beautiful, lengthy letter, which I highly recommend you take a look at, the sources right here in your book, text 11. But here we're going to do one excerpt. The Rebbe explains how important it is when we talk about Israel, we talk about it from a Jewish perspective. We talk about it as a religiously ours land, as a God-given land, etc. And that's all comes down to using the words land of Israel and not to use the word state of Israel. This didn't start in 1948. Okay, excuse me. In 1948, more of us started to live there, right? We got an army. Lots of amazing things happened in 1948, but it wasn't anywhere near as much as when God gave us the land. What happened, right? As the Rebbe elaborates. Arnold, text 11.
Basically, one was a political thing, and the other one is
right. It wasn't just political, but yeah, right, exactly. But one was a much deeper thing.
I have received complaints. Why do I invoke the biblical land of Israel, the Holy Land, and the covenant with Abraham in the connection with modern Israel? Why do I mix God into the picture? After all, they say those who fought for the creation of the state, those who led it, those who currently direct it, and its authorized representatives, they all proclaim and take pains to emphasize that Israel is a state founded in 1948. My answer, put frankly, is that their narrative is false. No new entity was created in 48. Rather, that was the year in which a large part of the land of Israel was liberated.
Keep going.
An entity established in 1948 based on the agreement or authorization of the nations of the world has no strength or justification in terms of authentic response to the claim, you are thieves for having conquered the lands belonging to others, etc. A claim raised by the Arabs, the Vatican, the United Nations, and some Jews as well. This is why it is so crucial to underscore that it is our God-given homeland. Now, I do not delude myself into imagining that these just and honest arguments will prevail in the United Nations, the Vatican, etc. Nevertheless, transmitting this truth is critical for the morale of the Jewish youth living in the land, Holy Land, including those serving in the IDF, for Jewish American students, and for Jewish youth of other countries as well.
The Rebbe is pointing out something very, very powerful. I don't know that we're ever going to convince every single non-Jew in the world that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. I don't even know if that's our job, whatever, if God wanted it to happen, it would happen today. If God wanted it to happen tomorrow, whatever it is, right? But the Rebbe says, how important is it for Jews to know why the land of Israel belongs to us? And when you start mixing them up with a Balfour Declaration or a 1948 or a this or a that, you're really sending them down the wrong path. In order for a Jewish youth, I get questions all the time. Rabbi, I'm so concerned about what's going on campus. There's so many people that are so anti-Israel, right? Rabbi, I'm so concerned. There's soldiers in the IDF. There's an organization, I forgot what it's called, where soldiers in the IDF come out and they say, oh, the Jews are this, and they're occupiers, they're colonial. Like, what's it called?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's terrible, whatever, right? This says that this is a fight. This is a battle that we don't have the right to ignore. And that's a battle we can answer. To those people, we can come with the truth. We can remind them about Parshat Toldot, about this week's Parsha. We can remind them how Hashem tells Yitzchak, you know why you shouldn't leave the land of Israel? Because you are holy and the land that I am giving you is holy. Because the land belongs to the Jewish people and the land is holy for the Jewish people, not since 1948, not even since the giving of the Torah, but since before the world was created. Because when God created the world, He gave us the land of Israel, and there's no greater ownership than we can have for that. So l'chaim, l'chaim. To appreciate it, 1 second, let's take a picture.
Beautiful.
There we go. I'm lucky. There we go. And then, there you go. Colin and Ron, you guys smiling?
Yep.
Just making sure.
I see that smile, not after the fact, I hope.
So l'chaim, to recognizing that our connection to the land of Israel is much deeper than we ever imagined. By the way, I don't want to get into all the questions that this answers, but this starts to answer why the Rambam tells us that when people would come to the land of Israel, they would bend, the greatest sages, when they would come down to the land of Israel, what would they do? They would bend down and kiss the soil. What are you kissing physical earth for? I thought it's just about a spiritual energy there is land. No. The giving of the Torah taught us, Mount Sinai taught us, that this is about the holiness coming from the spiritual world and actually into the physical soil. This is why Jews have the custom that when we are buried, we take a little bit of soil from the land of Israel and put it into our graves. Right? Why? Because the connection the Jewish people have with the land of Israel is not just anymore about some ownership of it. It's about holiness. It's about something that's much deeper than we can ever tap into with our bodies. L'chaim, l'chaim.
L'chaim.